Hello, everyone. This is Chris Adams with Balancing Act. We're going to start in just a moment. We've got people joining as we speak, so hang tight, and we'll start in about 1 minute. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Adams with Balancing Act. Thank you so much for joining us for the very first of a new feature called Balancing Act Monthly. Balancing Act Monthly is intended to be just a short, once a month opportunity for mostly for our existing clients, but also for new ones if they're interested, to see some of the great work that you all are doing. I often feel like it's a shame that those of us at Balancing Act get to see the scores of great simulations and great work that you all do, but you all don't get to see each other's, and I end up showing it off to you, but usually on a one-on-one setting. And so this is an opportunity to do it with in just a little bit more efficient way. Today, we're going to be hearing from Megan Irwin, who is a budget and policy analyst with the city of Norfolk. They're one of the more recent cities to launch their simulation, and they're really right in the midst of it. So thank you, especially to Megan, for taking time during this very busy period. But one thing that is notable about them is that they really were very thoughtful in using the new custom scenario questions that we have. We made that feature available in the fall, and it takes a while to trickle through and sync up with budget cycles. But Norfolk was one of the first to do that, and they've really, I think, done some interesting things and some things that are worth sharing with other parts of the community. Megan and I had the chance to, along with some others, to share a little bit about what she's doing and what we're doing at Balancing Act on a GFOA training a while ago. And Megan's presentation seemed to be just perfect to have for the Balancing Act Monthly in terms of size and content. So I asked her if she would give a repeat performance on that. And so she agreed to. So in just a second, I'm going to turn it over to her. But just to remind you, with this GoToWebinar platform, if you have a question, we really hope you do have questions, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. The format will be that Megan will talk for around 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have some Q&A, and hopefully you all have some things that you want to ask her, or maybe even share about yourself. And then if there's time, I will give you just a brief overview of how you create custom questions in the new version of the software that we're releasing this week. So with that, Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'll just do a short introduction about myself first. So I began working for the city of Norfolk in June of this past year, so I'm fairly new as a full-time budget analyst. When I started, our city was in a pretty major transitional phase. So we had a new budget director, a new city manager, and almost all new city deputy city managers. And all of that transition, of course, inevitably meant that the leadership wanted to shake things up a bit. So our office decided to take a comprehensive look at our budgeting process. And as part of that, I was tasked with researching and recommending citizen engagement efforts in general, based on best practices around the country. Now, Norfolk has done some citizen engagement efforts through budget workshops in person in the past, and we did do that again this year, but we wanted to take it up a notch, and so we decided to implement Balancing Act after doing some research on available online simulations. So before I start talking about specifically what we did with our site, I just want to review some of the high-level goals that we established for our engagement process and explain some of the thought behind our design and implementation. So the way I see it, budget engagement has three main components. The first component is education. Of course, one of the goals is to educate the public about our city's financial situation, which isn't too rosy this year, and in general, the budget process. And we do that in a number of ways, including the traditional ways that I'm sure your cities also do, through our budget document and council hearings. And we also hold workshops. We publish a budget in brief and a popular annual financial report. But we thought this year that adding a balancing act would lend itself to help citizens gain a better understanding, maybe have a little bit more enthusiasm around the budget process, and potentially help us to add and reach a new demographic. So the other part of education is helping residents understand the reality of the cost of services. Of course, it's easy for residents to make a list of all the things they think a city should be doing, but it's a lot more difficult when they're forced to make trade-offs between the services that they value. And in our experience, that's been the most valuable takeaway from participants in our in-person workshops. And our guess is that people engaging in Balancing Act online learn the same lesson. We did struggle a little bit with the organization and categorization of our budget for Balancing Act. And we tried really hard not to fall into the trap of attempting to frame something in the best light to the detriment of transparency. For example, it might have been a little bit easier to roll some of our departments up that we felt have what we think citizens might perceive as too high of a budget, particularly in administrative departments. But we made sure that we kept those independent and transparent because it might look like it costs a lot, but that's because that's a cost of business, and that's okay. And residents should understand that and know what it costs. We also hope to get feedback from residents and try to get a feel for what services they prioritize, what they're willing to pay to get new services, or what they're willing to give up to keep the services that they already enjoy. And we went in knowing that none of this would be statistically significant, but we thought that by taking the information, presenting it to leadership with recognition of the bias inherent in this type of thing, that it's still really valuable feedback. And if nothing else, the feedback we get can at least act as a political temperature gauge. So depending on the intensity of reaction we get from certain questions, we might have an idea of whether or not it would be feasible to move forward, especially knowing that the people who are engaging with Balancing Act are the ones who are likely to be vocal during the budget process. And then finally, implementation. So this is really the end goal of budget engagement. Of course, to collect the feedback we get from residents and actually use that feedback during the decision-making process. We have been very careful in our marketing language around Balancing Act so that residents understand that while the information that they give during the budget submission process on Balancing Act will be considered, there's not going to be a direct causal relationship between citizen feedback and budget decisions. But at the same time, we're doing everything in our power to understand that and to ensure that resident input is taken seriously by our leadership. We, of course, want it to be a two-way street, and that means that the timing of resident input and buy-in from our city manager were crucial to moving forward. So we actually launched Balancing Act in December and December 1st because we wanted to have plenty of time. So that gave them about 4 months before the city manager will propose his budget to play around with the budget and think through the issues and ultimately submit what they feel would be a good budget. We knew that if we didn't collect the information early enough, that the decisions around the budget would probably largely already be made. And we knew that if we didn't get buy-in to the engagement process from leadership, then the resident input that we did collect would fall on deaf ears. So we went in with the full intention to make engagement part of the process now and moving forward, and not to just to try to check a box to say that we are doing something new. Okay, so I'm going to show you some screenshots I took of our site. You're welcome to go to it yourself and check it out. It's norfolkva.balancingact.com. So I encourage you to go check it out. We like all the views we can get. So we made the decision to start with a deficit because that's where we are, and we wanted to know how citizens and residents might try to close the gap. So at this point, it's all about problem solving. We frame this around solving the budget gap. And then this spring, when the city manager issues his proposed budget, we'll upload a new version with the proposed budget in its place and present new questions to residents. And at that point, it'll be more about feedback to our solutions. How do residents think we did? What would they change at this point? And at that point, that information will be helpful to council as they make changes between the proposed budget and when they pass the final budget. So we did use the custom questions option, as Chris explained. And actually, we learned some things about the custom questions by attending some of the webinars ahead of time before we issued or launched our website. So we made sure to only use a few custom questions. So I think we ended up with 11, even though in our in-person workshops, almost all of our questions were sort of custom questions rather than sort of broad 1% changes to departments. And that's sort of the way that, because we went at the department level on the Balancing Act, that's how the rest of Balancing Act works for us. But for me, the custom questions are the most powerful part of Balancing Act, simply because of the influence that it can have on people's decisions. So we wanted to be sure that we didn't use hypothetical questions. So anything we ask is something the city would legitimately consider implementing. And the other reason that it's so powerful is because it really can frame the conversation around the budget. Most of the questions that we ask have to do with personnel, particularly. Some are service-oriented, but most of them are personnel-oriented because, frankly, that's where all the money is, and we're trying to solve a gap. But we could have easily asked questions in different frameworks. So we could do a focus on sustainability by framing questions around sustainability, focus on salary levels or administrative costs, or, you could think of a number of things. So I think the custom questions can straddle the line between policy making and fact reporting based on the messaging and the framing. So it's probably a good idea to vet questions through leadership or marketing and PR before publishing. And if you have some hot topic issues in your city, probably what's not asked is just as important as what is. So you should also think about that. So you can see in the slide that we did ask a question about our libraries department. So we've had a couple of new libraries being built recently, and so that's on people's mind. So our library budget is something we're looking at. We offered one option to save costs, which would be to close neighborhood branch libraries one day during the week. But we didn't want to only give people the option to reduce the library's budget, so we also added an option that people could increase library's budget by 1% if they had a preference for increasing the library budget. Another example, we actually added, in addition to our actual city departments, we added something called citywide budget actions so that we could ask more broad questions about, sorry, my phone was ringing. So we could ask more broad questions that affected the whole city. So for example, we did an option for changing the size of the city's workforce, either by reducing by 1% or reducing by 3%. And information I provided here in the information bubble is that reducing the city's workforce by 1% on average would result in job losses for 37 full-time positions. And of course that it won't affect the schools. And we thought that was important, and sort of the number of jobs that are affected was important. Based on our discussions in our in-person workshops, we found that people were really sensitive to job losses. And so people preferred to find other ways to save rather than having to make a decision about somebody losing their job. So we felt that that kind of information would really make somebody think twice about the decision that they're making, knowing that a decision would actually affect somebody's job. Um, a more specific question that we asked, this one was around revenue. So the food and beverage tax is one of the more unpopular taxes in Norfolk. So we gave a few options to decrease by 0.5%, increase by 0.5%, or increase by a full percent, and then gave the detail on how that would impact an actual bill at a restaurant. So I used a $25 restaurant bill, thinking it would be for one person. Some people thought that was a little low, might use a $50 restaurant bill next time to make it a little more average for families, and noted the actual increase in the meals tax. So the food and beverage tax raises a lot of money in the city, and so it helps people to put this in context when they're making decisions about broad services that they want and what's the bottom line to my income and my cost as a result of this change. And then finally, this is sort of our hits so far. I just downloaded this before we presented. So we've gotten 1,100 page views and 142 budget submissions. So about every month, we are downloading the information and summarizing it based on whether people have increased or decreased various categories. And give that information to the city manager rather than try to pull all the data and all the comments. We just sort of summarize it at a broader level for the city manager. So does anybody have any questions?
Well, while people are thinking about that, this is terrific work. Have you gotten any feedback from either the public or other city staff about the citywide budget actions? That's actually a unique function that you all in Norfolk have, and I'm just wondering if you feel like that's A, being understood by residents, and B, providing useful information to city officials.
I haven't heard anything specifically about this, but they mimic the questions that we asked in our in-person workshops, and these were the more the bigger ticket items, I guess, if you think about it. So one of the options is in the citywide budget actions is salary increase for a citywide salary increase. So of course that's going to be fairly expensive. And then a retirement COLA, which has implications beyond just the cost of the COLA for 1 year, because of the way that the actuarial stuff is calculated. So those were heavily discussed at our workshops, and so I'm not sure if the same level of understanding is coming across on Balancing Act, but we have had some selections in that area, so it is being looked at.
Okay, that's great. I see Jeremy Lucas's hand is raised too. It looks like it's been up for a while, Jeremy. Sorry, I didn't see it. Jeremy is from Milwaukee County. I'm going to unmute you, Jeremy, and hopefully you're still there and want to have a question to ask.
Yeah, certainly. Megan, I had a question for you. Have you decided how you're going to handle just the general categorical changes to, say, maybe the general management or constitutional officers? And I know you just said it was not going to be a direct correlation between what came in Balancing Act to what happens in the budget, but those items without, scenarios, have you guys decided on how you're going to, approach if there's a large scale public request for, say, a decrease to the information technology budget?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. We have thought about that. So we made sure that as this has been coming in, it's actually been pretty stable, which has been interesting. So every time we download it, it's sort of more information leading to the same conclusion. So that's been interesting. And so our role from our perspective in the budget office is to collect the feedback, give it to leadership, present it to city council, and then let them work it out. So I'm not sure. Like I said, we did try to get buy-in to make sure that that this input would be taken seriously. But as far as how they're going to implement that, I couldn't say.
It is a tough issue.
Mm-hmm.
Any other question? Oh, Jeremy, do you have a follow-up?
No, that's great. Thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions for Aaron? Well, Aaron, thank you for sharing a little bit of what you've been doing, and to the degree that there are public documents, reports, and so forth, please share them with me, and I'll find a way to share them with the network.
Sure.
All right, good. So this may be the least interesting part, but if anybody's interested, I thought it might be sort of fun to show you all how custom questions are created in the new version of Balancing Act. So as some of you know, or many of you know, even though you might be going through all sorts of trauma and turmoil with your where you are in your budget process, we're going through trauma and turmoil with getting ready to release a brand new version of the back end of Balancing Act that's going to be much improved. It's going to do things like allow for the importing of your data and all sorts of fine-tuning options on the standard plus-minus questions. And then in addition to that, it's going to be much easier to create the custom questions to those who are subscribed to the custom package. So this is a quick snapshot. We'll be doing a more formal release later, but this is just a little bit of a preview for you all. The way that you make custom questions in the new format. So sorry, this is spending, and so I've just got a couple of categories: police, parks and recreation. Let's say that we want to go to recreation and ask a question. If we clicked on this, it would allow us to fine tune it, like putting in ceilings and floors to kind of limit the range of responses, or toggle between dollars versus percentages, etc. Let's go to convert scenario question. And so then we're just going to say, I'm going to give it a quick code name that this is just for use in reporting. I'm going to call it rec hours. And then kind of along the lines of what Megan did with her library, just to ask a question, something like, should the hours at the rec center be increased? And then you go down here, and probably the first answer would be no, and I won't put in any dollar difference or anything there. But for those of you who currently use Balancing Act, you'll see that there's actually a much better rich text editor down here, which I think will be really nice. Let me go to the next option, and let's go ahead and say yes into the evening, and then put in a dollar difference. Let's just put in $60,000. And then if in the info text, we could say currently, close at 6. And then you could say, but say families prefer evenings or something like that. And then I'll just add another quick one here, and we'll just say yes earlier in the morning. And then we'll put something, maybe we'll put $50,000 in for that. And then if we wanted, we could put in another one that would just maybe have both options, something like that. But let me go ahead and just close that. And then you can show a preview and see how easy it is to create this. So if we now go to Parks and Recreation, we've now got this nice little custom question. So Megan and Jeremy and a couple others on this call, you had to slog through our stopgap editor, but going forward, it's going to be a lot easier. So thank you for slogging through that, and thank you for helping us to design a better module. Any last questions or comments before we close this down and let you all get back to work? All right. Well, thank you once again to everyone for their participation, and a special thank you to Megan. Please be sure to tune in for, I think it's March 21st. We've got the City and County of Denver, Rachel Barden, who I think is Senior Budget Analyst, is going to be presenting on how They presented a very simple taxpayer receipt to Denver residents, but there's really a lot of very important complexity on the back end. She's going to talk about how she did that, and she'll be joined by Courtney Law, who's the Public Information Officer for the Budget and Finance Department here in Denver. And then in April, I can't remember the exact date, Maya Kumazawa from the city of Charlottesville is going to talk about some of the things that they've done. They've had great success. They've got maybe the highest, if not the highest, participation rate compared to their population, as well as they've done some really nice, simple reporting, which I think is a good example for a lot of folks to think about in terms of reporting to council and also a public report. So with that, Megan, anything else from you? Are you already on?
Nope. Yeah, I was muted.
Okay.
No, I don't have anything else. Thanks.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you again for doing this, and thanks to everyone. And I just got a question from Annie Bierbauer in Fort Collins, and she asked if this would be recorded. And the answer is yes, it will be. And I think that GoToWebinar will actually send you a link in about an hour. So once again, thanks everybody, and we'll stay in touch.